Hi, my name is McCall, and today we're going to take a look at DSLR versus mirrorless cameras. So technology moves so fast for both of these systems that this video may not be all that relevant within the next few years. However, I do want to go over the pros and cons of each system as of right now. And please note, guys, I'm not directly comparing the Nikon D7100 to the Sony a6500. We're not doing a comparison between the cameras, but rather just looking at the technology built into them and why each one may better fit your needs. Okay, guys? Let's begin. And starting with the DSLR, the most notable difference between this and the mirrorless camera is how much chunkier it is. Now, the reason why it's chunkier is because it actually has a mirror on the inside so that you can see through the pentaprism viewfinder. Now, some people truly believe that having a beefier grip just really helps them get more stable shots, and they also believe it acts as a better counterweight whenever you have the longer telephoto lenses on there. Now, I do have to admit, I do prefer the little bit chunkier grip that's on here just because it's a little more comfortable to hold and grasp tightly. However, if I can get the same job done with a mirrorless camera that weighs ounces lighter, I might prefer to go with that if I'm shooting all day long. Now, another benefit of a DSLR is, generally speaking, they have better battery life. They have a much more chunkier batteries than, let's say, the Sony batteries. Now, like I said, guys, this is eventually going to change. Sony just released the A7R3, which finally has a DSLR size battery. Now, eventually they're going to get there, but there's still a lot of mirrorless cameras out there that just don't have that good of battery life. So that's kind of counterproductive if you have a mirrorless camera to take with you for these long shoots, but you don't have the batteries to support it. I could easily go all day long shooting with this camera with one and possibly two batteries. Now, another huge benefit of a DSLR that I personally like is the fact that they have a lot of dedicated buttons on them. Now, these mirrorless cameras out there are starting to pick up on this, and they're adding more buttons to their cameras, but I just don't think they'll ever have quite as many as a DSLR unless they start beefing up their body size, which is kind of counterproductive to the whole mirrorless technology. A lot of landscape photographers out there actually prefer these viewfinders over the electronic viewfinder that you're gonna find in mirrorless cameras. And the reason being is, let's just give you a scenario. If you're ever trying to capture that Milky Way or whatever you're taking photos of, some people actually prefer to look through the viewfinder and see what the human eye can see through your lens. As where an electronic viewfinder, once you crank up the ISO or once you roll it back to get the 15-30 second exposure shots, it's going to display a little bit differently on the back of your screen. It's one of those things, guys. I don't personally consider myself a landscape artist. I do it from time to time, and I'm perfectly fine with an electronic viewfinder. But if this is something that you're doing a lot, you might want to look into it. So another thing you guys have to keep in mind is DSLRs have been around a lot longer than mirrorless cameras. These beefier bodies are able to accommodate many more functions, including more buttons, bigger batteries, etc. That also includes dual SD card slots. Now, once again, guys, as I just stated earlier, this isn't always going to be relevant for the next few years. Like I said, Sony just released A7R3 that actually has dual SDs. But at the moment, there's not too many mirrorless cameras out there that have that. So once again, you still kind of have to give that to the DSLR. There's still a lot of features on here that we're wanting to see transferred over to the mirrorless systems. 9 times out of 10, they're all gonna have very good weather sealing over a mirrorless cameras. What I'm saying here is, like, if you were to take this body apart, you would see a lot of rubberized components and glue and stuff like that to really keep it weather sealed so that rain, snow, etc. won't really affect this. Mirrorless cameras, some of them are getting there. I mean, some of them state that they're like splash resistant or this and that, but they're not quite as rugged as a DSLR. All right, and one of the last really good benefits of a DSLR, which once again is kind of starting to become debatable, is the autofocus capabilities. Now, it's said that these DSLRs can focus a lot better in low light situations, and that is true. Now, once again, the Sony a7R3 is a spectacular camera, and the autofocus capabilities in low light is phenomenal, including the Sony A9 as well. But you can pick up just about any professional DSLR and you'll be able to get pretty good focus in dimly lit scenarios. Alright, so now we're gonna go into the things I don't really like about DSLR systems. And the first thing that most people state is the size and weight of it. They really can't stand how much bulkier it is than a mirrorless camera. Now, for me personally, this is not a deal breaker. If a mirrorless camera were this size and it had all the outstanding features that I want, I would get it just because it's not that big of a deal to me. However, after long days of shooting, a DSLR is eventually going to get tiresome. But I personally think that some of the downsides to DSLRs, like one thing I'm going to point out is the screens on the back. Now, not every DSLR has a flat, unadjustable screen on the back. Nikon and Canon both have different kind of tilt swivel screens on the back. They have different kind of systems, but still, majority of DSLRs have a flat screen that you cannot adjust. And that is a huge downfall, because if you are, getting on the ground trying to, get a really interesting shot, you're gonna have to get down and muddy with your camera. Now, there's a lot of professional photographers that do state that that's the only way to go because it's a lot more rugged, and when they're climbing up in the mountains that they need this and that. And if that's your style of shooting, guys, then that might be something you need. I, however, have never had a problem breaking any of my tilt screens or even the swivel ones. So with DSLRs, another downside is would be like the viewfinder. Having an electronic viewfinder, whether you agree with the technology or not, there are huge benefits of having it, including like focus peaking, punch in to zoom and whatnot. And being able to see the shot that you're about to get before you take the image is an absolute game changer. I understand on DSLRs, you can put it into live view mode, but it's kind of laggy and it's just, your burst rate's gonna go down and this and that. With the mirrorless camera, before you take the image, you already know what you're gonna get. And I just absolutely love that. There's no guessing whenever you take the shots. It's just very straightforward. Now, I'm gonna point this out. Even though I have cameras that do the same thing, but you are gonna get blackout shooting with a DSLR. Every time the mirror flops up to take the image, you're gonna get a moment of blackout. Now, I have the A7R II and the A6500. I too get blackout just because the shutter clacking down in front of the sensor. However, we have the option to do full electronic silent shooting mode. That means that there's actually no physical shutter. It's just like a scan over the sensor. And that silent shooting mode, while it's still being perfected, it can come in super handy if you're into street photography. But silent shooting could actually be even more beneficial to landscape photographers, because whenever the shutter clacks on this, there is a slight vibration. And if you are doing a long exposure shot, that can cause some severe distortion in your images. So with the silent shooting, it's gonna completely eliminate all of that. Alright, so I just went over a majority of the pros and cons of a DSLR system. Just keep in mind, guys, some of this stuff varies from company to company and model to model, but I'm just talking about majority of DSLRs, okay? So now we're gonna take a look at the mirrorless systems. Now, the first, most obvious, notable difference is, once again, guys, the size and weight of this. I mean, just look how small, nimble, and cute this camera is. It's just so amazing to see what Sony is able to pack into such a small camera. So besides the size and weight of the mirrorless cameras, one of the other main reasons why people switch over is obviously because of the electronic technology. Obviously, there's no mirror there to clack up and down when you take a picture. And you have a EVF, an electronic viewfinder, that will show you what you're about to take a picture or video of before you even do it. Having the ability to see exactly what you're about to take an image of completely eliminates the guesswork out of everything. Don't even take the shot until you get the exact exposure, shutter speed, ISO, and white balance you want. You no longer have to take test shots, and that is absolutely a game changer. It saves you so much time when you're on the fly, especially like whenever you're doing like travel photography, portraits, etc. Now, this is where a lot of people are probably gonna critique me and get all fussy and whatnot, but I believe that mirrorless technology is a little bit more cutting edge than DSLRs. Sony kind of started the whole storm with the launch of their A7 platform, right? And they weren't afraid to put full HD video at 60 frames per second in there. Even Canon didn't do that on their 5D Mark III. They had it only at 720p. therefore I feel like Sony, you know, since they're kind of leading the charge, they continue to kind of be like the standard, you know, at least at this point in time with the whole mirrorless market. So they're packing a lot of really awesome technology into these cameras, and I think it's only going to go up from here. So I do believe that the whole mirrorless camera market kind of happened by accident. I think the Sony a7 was just kind of like, well, let's just make, you know, a nice little consumer camera, you know, XYZ. Let's put a little tilting screen on the back, and people are like, yes, this is what I wanted, myself included. I was like, yeah, this is rad. I finally can get a full frame camera that has everything that I want inside of it. And I think that's where mirrorless cameras continue that tradition of having either a tilt screen or at least the swivel out screen. So it's really cool to see mirrorless cameras having this, because it really just makes our job so much easier. So there's a lot of really great technology packed into this. Now I'm going to talk about the things I don't really like. Keep in mind, guys, this isn't about the Sony a6500. It's actually more about just the mirrorless technology in general, okay? So kind of like what I said about the DSLRs, about them having weather sealing and whatnot. Supposedly this is like splash resistant, but that's about as far as Sony's able to go right now. And I think that's probably being because they want to keep the cost down, and they also want to keep it as compact as possible. However, I personally would not mind if they would bulk it up just, you know, just a little bit to give us that weather sealing that we need. Because I know that there are a lot of travel landscape photographers out there that would love to have this system, but they don't have the weather sealing to support them. Another thing that a lot of pros gripe about is the lack of dedicated buttons on these cameras. Now, I personally don't think this is a deal breaker, because I use the Sony cameras and they have the new, you know, like little quick access function menu, and I'm able to access everything I need to there. I'm okay with having menus. It wouldn't hurt to add a few more buttons here, but if it's a deal breaker for you not having those dedicated buttons, then maybe the system's just not for you. Now, I think one of the biggest gripes about these mirrorless cameras is their freaking battery life. I mean, look at the size of the battery that goes in the a6500 versus the Nikon D7100. Now, keep in mind that these are both APS-C cameras, and this battery that goes in a Nikon, like I said, will last me an entire day of video shooting and probably close to 2-3 days of photography work. While this, I'm gonna have to have 3 or 4 of these in my pocket, especially if I'm shooting 4K video. And just to kind of piggyback off the whole like compact body size, a lot of these cameras only have one SD card slot as well. Like I said, you know, the A7R3, it finally has 2 SD card slots, and I think we're gonna start seeing a trend of more of that. It's just, as of right now, a lot of these systems only have one. If these mirrorless systems want to attract the working pros, you know, doing weddings, doing sports photography and this and that, they're probably going to have to start implementing 2 SD card slots into their bodies to attract those guys to come on over to the dark side. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up the video. Thank you all so much for watching the video, and I urge you to comment down below whether you believe DSLR or mirrorless technology is the way to go. Alright guys, so if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, because I plan on releasing at least one video or photography related video every week here on YouTube. Okay guys, so that's it. That's all I got for y'all. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, I'm McCall.